Hello and welcome to another episode of the AgNext Podcast, where we're always excited to tell you about what's next from AgNext. Today we're talking about methane, and more specifically, a new series of science-based fact sheets developed in partnership with the Colorado Department of Agriculture. These resources are designed to help producers, policymakers, and industry stakeholders better understand and address methane emissions from ruminant livestock. Let's get into it. So these fact sheets were led by you, Dr. Sara Place, and we certainly appreciate you being here today. Thanks for coming back and joining us.
Of course.
You collaborated with the Colorado Department of Agriculture on these fact sheets. Can you describe the intention of the fact sheets, the work? Like what was the impetus of this work that you did with CDA?
Yeah, so this was a part of a bigger project with the Colorado Department of Ag, on basically methane in animal agriculture and ways to reduce methane emissions. And a part of that was coming up with a series of fact sheets, fact sheets specifically, to just kind of give an overview of the basics. What is methane? How does it get formed? And then thinking about what are the ways that we can actually potentially mitigate methane from livestock systems in Colorado, and of course they're applicable to across the country in terms of enteric methane and then manure methane.
Awesome. So before we get into the fact sheets, can you describe what else was in that project, just to give the
Sure.
listeners kind of an idea of what CDA asked you and your team to pull together, what we delivered, and then this is, of course, part of one of those outcomes.
Yeah. So as a part of this, this was one of those key outcomes was actually these fact sheets. And then what we also did, working with you and John Ritten, was to do a survey of Colorado producers on what are their impressions of methane and methane mitigation. What are things that they would view as feasible or not feasible? And so that was a really interesting survey, and actually hopefully we'll be able to publish that as a peer-reviewed paper and probably come back and talk about that at a future date of like what were the main findings of that. And then another key component was actually a field day, basically, what we called our methane day. So that was at the end of our summit in June of 2025. And ultimately had producers, had folks that are regulators, people in the industry that are interested in this topic all come out to our RDEC facility and actually hear from folks in the Colorado government about like how does the emission inventory actually get formed, information about other policies in the past that are kind of potentially models for how something could work on a voluntary basis in the future in the state from a methane reduction standpoint. And then we did a tour of the facility out at RDEC, and then also a really great producer panel. So representation from dairy producers, the sheep industry, cattle industry, and kind of topped it off of what are people actually thinking about this issue? How would they approach this topic? And I think that was really good for especially policymakers to hear during that event.
Yeah, I agree. The work has just been really fascinating. I mean, the fact sheets are incredible. They're definitely first of their kind, and we'll talk about what's in them. But the producer survey, I think, was just some of the most fun results that I've ever gotten to be a part of and really read through, which was, hey, here's these mitigation strategies we think we might have, which are a little questionable anyway, based on the amount of research that, exists today. But what do you think about their feasibility? It was just really fascinating work. So fun to do.
Yeah. And I think that's really important, right? Is often, we're doing all this research, but we need to actually have producer input into what is feasible or not feasible, or understanding what their concerns are. Absolutely. And then what type of research that we need to do to overcome any concerns that folks have.
Absolutely. And I was really impressed with the Colorado Department of Ag that they were willing to fund that and wanted to fund it and to be a partner on that. So just wanted to preface some of this work before we get into the fact sheets.
And another point that it was part of the work, there was a whole team involved, right, Sarah? What it takes to develop this easy, let's say, digested material. There was a lot of people involved, and faculty, students. I think there's a lot of students involved. Can you, what it takes to make this, now it's pretty cool and it's easy to see. There's a lot of infographics, cool things, but I bet it takes a lot of effort to get that done, right?
Put everything we know about methane
In 2 pages.
Into
Yeah.
2 pages.
Yes.
How did you do that?
Yeah. So sometimes it's harder to write something short than something long,
yeah.
right? And so the intent of these fact sheets is ultimately anybody that's interested in this, have it to be a resource where, if we're talking about producers or even general public or anyone that may have questions about this, that it's a credible source and an easy to digest source. So yeah, the process of doing this, I think we have, I just counted it up, I think we have like 15 different authors,
Yep.
right? So there was a kind of a mass effort at first to draft these, right? So we kind of had our topic areas that we knew that we wanted to work on. And so that first one was just like, how does enteric methane actually get formed?
Yep.
Like, what is it, right? And then what are the dietary strategies and what are the potential feed additives, right, that could lower methane? And then the similar approach with manure of like, where does this actually come from manure systems? And then how could we potentially mitigate it? And so it was engaging different folks in terms of that approach. And part of it was drafting it. And then I was trying to go through and rewrite it sometimes with an eye to be very generalist, right? And hopefully somebody who's not a technical expert at all can pick this up, read it, and have a good understanding of each one of these topics.
And potentially even passing that information along, right? So that's one of the cool things. I think that our website and those things that the team is producing is, I can get this, read it, and explain to my dad or somebody else. I think that's one of the really, really cool things, right?
Exactly. So hopefully a great resource that folks can share and we can kind of have an amplifying effect from that standpoint.
So now when we talk about the person who's going to get the fact sheet and read, and like the first one of the ones that you have is a formation and impact of enteric methane fact sheet, right? Can you now, like for the person who is reading, maybe they want to quote Dr. Place in the future or something, in an easy way, explain how is methane is produced?
Yeah. So I think the key thing we try to convey here is just like putting it in context, right?
Mm-hmm.
So methane is one of those greenhouse gases.
Mm-hmm.
And if we think about methane in the U.S., it's about enteric methane. So the methane naturally produced from ruminants. It's about 3% of U.S. greenhouse gas emissions. And so in this fact sheet, we just kind of go through that, hey, it's not actually the cattle or the sheep or the goats that are producing this methane, but it's the microorganisms that live in their rumen or in their stomach. And so there's kind of an explanation there and a nice little infographic of highlighting at a very high level that basically these animals eat plants, the microbes break down the plants, and then a byproduct of that process naturally is methane production. So that's really a key component of that fact sheet. And then the other thing that we talk about is a little bit about trends over time, right? Mm-hmm. And particularly methane per unit of production for both beef and dairy in the U.S. And that's a really important context piece as well, as things aren't always stagnant, right? The cattle producers, whether beef or dairy producers in the United States, have made a lot of improvements in productivity and being able to produce more with less. And that actually translates into lower enteric methane emissions per unit of milk and per unit of beef.
And you mentioned the infographics. These fact sheets are just so visually appealing. They don't feel like big, heavy academic documents, right? They're something hopefully that people could print out and hand out and really use as a engagement piece. Yeah, I love that. Another fact sheet that you developed discusses feed additives. And in this sheet, you identify different feed additives, both natural and synthetic, and outline their impact on methane. Why is a resource like this important? And this is an area that we know still needs some more research put into it. But let's talk about why feed additives were one of the fact sheets that you selected to really dissect information into 2 pages.
Before, sir, can you also mention why it's important to reduce methane?
Oh, sure.
And then go the feed additives as a tool.
Yeah, so the interest in methane is kind of twofold. So one would be, of course, we talk about greenhouse gas emissions and trying to reduce the climate impact, if you will, of food production, and methane would be a part of that. And then methane is also interesting because it is a loss of the animal's feed energy, right? So we're always interested in if there are ways that we can potentially improve efficiency by lowering methane emissions as well. And so that second fact sheet is on feed additives. And so this is something that there's a lot of interest in feed additives. People have heard of some of these things often in the popular press, such as especially like seaweed has captured a lot of the public attention. And so for us, our intent with that fact sheet is just to quickly kind of go through, well, here are the different categories. And then the nice feature of that fact sheet is really a table that kind of summarizes things, right? Of, well, what is the evidence base? How much peer-reviewed evidence is there actually backing some of these things up? What is the potential reduction based on the current peer-reviewed literature? And then what are the potential benefits or potential trade-offs with actually using these feed additives? And that's important to note is like all of these fact sheets, and particularly that one, is one that's definitely time-stamped in time of like in May 2025, the world as we know it, this is where we're at, right? And things do change in this space. And so as we've noted in that fact sheet, right now there's only one feed additive that's actually approved for use in lactating dairy cattle for reduction of methane, right? And that's Bovaer, or the scientific name or synthetic name is 3-nitroxypropanol. So we highlight that as well, right? Here's all these potential additives. There's only one that actually has a label claim that is for reducing methane.
Excellent. Another way to, let's say, change methane production from ruminants is changing diets.
Yes.
And that's probably less timestamp, and we have a better understanding on that as well. I think we do. I don't know. So can you talk a little bit about this fact sheet? What are the main focus on that?
Yeah. So kind of a subtle difference between the feed additive fact sheet and the dietary strategies. But the idea behind the dietary strategies was to talk about like kind of the main ingredients or how we would formulate diets, not adding something additional to a diet, but how do the variety of diets or ingredients that we use in ruminant production today potentially impact enteric methane? And so kind of similar to the feed additive fact sheet, we have a nice kind of table that summarizes, these are the different ways that we can potentially influence methane emissions with things such as altering the forage to concentrate ratio in an animal's diet, or doing things like adding lipids or fats potentially to the animal's diet to potentially reduce enteric methane.
On the forage concentrates, I can just know it's sometimes counterintuitive, and I like.
Yeah,
it's clear for us that works, but just touch a little bit. Which one would you expect to have more methane production? The forage-based or the grain-based diet, or things like?
Yeah. So if we had two animals sitting next to each other and they were each eating a diet, one with mostly forage or one that included more concentrates, the animal with the one including more concentrates or grain, right, would have lower methane emissions. And so that is something that sometimes is counter to popular understanding, right? Folks think, well, maybe more natural, quote unquote, natural grazing, right, would have lower methane emissions, but those animals actually produce more. And that's a bit explained, right, of ultimately it's just what kind of microbial populations we're supporting in that rumen or in that stomach that's driving those methane emissions.
Yeah, absolutely. And goes back to the microbes that are being...
They're really the ones that are doing it all, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And it's important that the consumer maybe has a good understanding of the trade-offs, that if they want to go for certain label, maybe the methane emission from that type of product will be greater than the other, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
So Sarah, in these first three fact sheets that we've discussed, kind of what is methane broadly, why does it matter, feed additives, and then dietary strategies, those are geared towards dairy and beef production, those three? Okay, great. Just want producers to understand which ones they should go read. The next one we have on our list to discuss was one developed around manure methane. And of course, this would be more applicable to the dairy sector. But can you talk about that fact sheet and what it's looking at?
Yeah, so it's kind of going over where does methane actually occur from manure management systems. So yes, it is more relevant to dairy producers just because, as we kind of explained in the fact sheet and even that first fact sheet, right, one of those key criteria for those microbes that make methane is they need to have an air-free or oxygen-free environment to really thrive. And so often the way we manage manure on dairy farms allows for that, right? When we have things like anaerobic lagoons, right, for treating manure and for manure storage, the trade-off of that, if you will, is potential methane production. And that's kind of in contrast to a lot of the way manure is managed on beef operations, where we often have a lot of exposure to air and very little methane that's actually being produced. So in that fact sheet, we just kind of go through those basics of, again, methane formation, but then also a list of some of the different ways that we can manage manure and the potential impact or relative amounts of methane that may come from those different manure management systems. And that's complex because, as many dairy producers live it every single day know, they may have multiple different systems that they actually have on their operation, right? So it's a complex picture, meaning they may have a manure separator, right, where they're trying to separate out solids. And then they also have a retention pond or an anaerobic lagoon still for treatment of those remaining liquids, right? So there's multiple combinations there. So we just kind of try to go through the relative amounts of methane that may come from each one of those systems.
And so much diversity in manure management, especially in Colorado. I mean, it seems like we have every single system that's ever been developed in a one county region. It's just incredible.
Yes, depending on how the animals are housed, then kind of dictates, well, then how are we going to manage the manure? And there's no perfect answer, right? And so that is one of those challenges always in the dairy space is nobody has created any sort of cookie cutter way of this is the best way to manage manure, right? It really depends.
Right.
But
right.
On that note, what are some of the most practical and scalable solutions for producers like in Colorado beyond to manage that manure and potentially mitigate the impact?
Yeah. So, there's a variety of ways, right? And it really is dependent upon the producer themselves. And so, like, one of the collaborators we had with that one fact sheet on basically the ways to mitigate methane was Jordan Lambert-Kraft, who's the person that runs the Ag Innovation group, right, at CSU Spur. So she has a nice series of questions that's actually included at the end of that fact sheet of thinking about it critically. If you're going to approach this, if you're a producer, you want to ask yourselves about where you currently are and what you expect that future state to be, what you actually want out of it, and then what the potential costs and benefits are, right? Pretty logical, but it's a nice series of questions to think through. How would you approach mitigation from where you are today with a baseline? So that's kind of a roundabout way to answer your question, but ultimately it would depend on the farm, right? For some folks, sure, maybe an anaerobic digester makes sense, but it's also very costly and a huge capital investment and can be hard to run if you don't have the expertise. And so some of those things would be those considerations there of, do you go that route or do you go a different route of trying to manage your solids and your nutrients differently?
Great. So Sarah, you released these at the aforementioned CDA Methane Day, which is super exciting. Where can listeners find these fact sheets? And then how do these fact sheets in this work more broadly align with AgNext's mission to promote sustainable practices in animal agriculture? Yeah.
So these fact sheets are available on the AgNext website. So at agnext.colostate.edu. And then they will also be released in the near future, kind of periodically on social media. So we'll be releasing each one on a Monday and kind of giving a spotlight to each one each week.
# Methane Monday.
Methane Monday.
Love this.
Yes. And then, of course, a key part of our mission is to actually provide information, right, to get it out of the ivory tower and to have something that's actually more digestible. And that's ultimately the intent of this. And we're really happy to be able to partner with Colorado Department of Ag to actually achieve that.
Great. And these are also going through the extension peer review process. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So with CSU Extension, they've actually just kind of revamped this process, but the goal is to make sure, obviously we kind of pre-peer reviewed these because we had 15 authors, right? We had a lot of eyeballs on them. But to have another set of peer review and actually have these go through the CSU extension process. And there's basically a journal, if you will, that where all those will live. So that's a new process and folks can check that out. I actually don't have the website for that right now, but maybe in the future, yes. Yeah. I think John Rinton is a key editor for this journal, so we have an inside source.
But it's available in our website.
Yep,
exactly. Today.
Today. Well, Sarah, thanks for being here. Thanks for your great work as always in the methane space and beyond to that. You're an incredible scientist and an asset to the AgNext team, and we appreciate you. Thank you, everyone, for joining another episode of the AgNext Podcast, where we're always excited to talk about what's next at AgNext. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook, X, LinkedIn, and Instagram. If you have comments, suggestions, or feedback that you would like to give us, please send us an email to agnext.colostate.edu, and we'll do our best to answer you as soon as we can.